You do not care about this family, do you? My sister cried out when I refused to open my checkbook one more time. You are completely heartless, my parents shouted at me from across my own dining room table. I looked at the three of them standing in my home, and I smiled. Believe me, I care, I told them. Then I connected my phone to my living room speakers and hit play. Their faces cracked like glass as the security camera audio filled the room, exposing every filthy lie they had told. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand your ground against family members who only saw you as a walking ATM. My name is Chloe. I'm 35 years old and a senior director of hospitality in Atlanta. Growing up, I was always the responsible one, the reliable one, the one expected to fix everything, while my younger sister Jasmine got to be the golden child. I worked 70-hour weeks to buy my pristine townhome, while Jasmine floated through life on our parents' praises. But the real breaking point happened right inside my own dining room, on what was supposed to be a peaceful Sunday evening. I had spent all afternoon cooking a beautiful traditional family dinner. The house smelled amazing with the scent of smothered chicken and collard greens. For a brief moment, I thought we could just have a normal evening of connection. But the moment we sat down, Jasmine, who is 32 years old, dropped a massive 15-page leather-bound mood board right onto my custom oak dining table. The heavy book hit the wood with a loud smack, knocking over my water glass and soaking the linen napkins. Jasmine did not even blink at the mess she made. She simply adjusted her designer sweater and smiled a bright fake smile. "So, Chloe," she announced, "Preston and I have been talking. Mom and Dad have their 40th wedding anniversary coming up next month. We think it is only right to throw them a massive 200-person family reunion gala. And since you work in hospitality, we are putting you in charge of hosting and fully financing the entire event." I slowly grabbed a towel to wipe up the spilled water, keeping my breathing steady. I looked from Jasmine to her husband Preston. Preston is 34, a white tech bro who constantly talks about his startup company, but never actually seems to make a dime. Then I looked at my parents, Thomas and Evelyn, who were sitting there nodding along, as if Jasmine had just proposed the cure for a disease. I tossed the wet towel aside. "No," I said flatly. "I am not doing it, and I am certainly not paying for it." The room went completely silent. Jasmine let out a loud, dramatic gasp, as if I had just slapped her across the face. "Excuse me?" she snapped. "Mom and Dad have sacrificed everything to give us a good life. They deserve to be celebrated by their community. How can you sit in this fancy house and be so incredibly selfish?" My chest tightened. I looked right into my sister's eyes. "Selfish," I repeated. "Jasmine, I am completely tapped out financially. I spent $40,000 paying for your lavish destination wedding in Tulum exactly 1 year ago. I am still rebuilding my savings from your beachfront floral arches and your open bar. I do not have the budget to throw a 200-person gala just so you can play party planner." Jasmine let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She looked over at our mother and shook her head. "Are you really going to let her sit here and lie to you guys? Chloe, everyone in this room knows Mom and Dad paid for my wedding. Why do you always have to make everything about you and pretend you are some kind of savior?" I stared at her in pure disbelief. My parents had indeed taken all the credit for her wedding in front of our extended family and their church friends. They had stood up at the reception and soaked in the applause for being such generous parents. But it was my name on the venue contracts. It was my credit card that was swiped for the caterer. And now they were actively gaslighting me in my own home, pretending my financial sacrifice never even existed. Before I could defend myself, my brother-in-law Preston leaned forward, resting his elbows on my table. "Listen, Chloe," he said, using that condescending tone he always reserved specifically for me. "You need to understand your role in the family unit. Jasmine and I are building generational wealth through my tech company. Mom and Dad are the respected elders of the community. You are a single woman with a good corporate job. It is your duty to provide the capital for family functions. That is just how this works. My blood boiled. The sheer audacity of this man sitting at my table eating the food I cooked, telling me it was my duty to empty my bank account for his wife. I turned my attention to my parents, expecting them to shut Preston down and defend my hard work. Instead, my mother Evelyn folded her arms across her chest and glared at me. "Preston is right, Chloe," my mother said sharply. "You have always been so bitter. You have a good career, but you have no husband and no children. You should be honored to do this for the family. Instead, you are sitting here making up lies about paying for Jasmine's wedding just because you are jealous of her happiness. If you will not host this anniversary party, then you are no daughter of mine." I looked at the four of them, my family. They had come into my home, eaten my food, and demanded my money while rewriting history to erase my contributions. They thought they had me backed into a corner. They thought I would cave, just like I always did when they threatened to withhold their love. But they did not know that I had recently installed a new smart home security system. And they certainly did not know what those cameras had captured them saying when they thought I was not listening. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply reached into the pocket of my slacks and pulled out my smartphone. I swiped open the security app and tapped the Bluetooth icon, connecting it to the surround sound speakers I had installed in the living room ceiling. "What are you doing?" Jasmine demanded, wiping away a fake tear that had managed to escape her eye. "Are you ignoring us?" "Mom is talking to you." "I am not ignoring you," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I am just preparing to write the check. But first, I think we should all listen to a little podcast I discovered. It is quite fascinating." Before any of them could ask another question, I pressed play. The crystal-clear audio filled the dining room, vibrating through the floorboards. It was from Thanksgiving Day. I had been upstairs taking a shower while Jasmine and Preston were down here alone in my kitchen, supposedly making a salad. The recording started with Jasmine's distinct high-pitched giggle. Then came Preston's voice, sounding much less like a tech visionary and much more like a desperate street hustler. "We just need 20,000, he said on the recording. "If I do not get this bridge loan, the servers go offline by the end of next month and the investors will absolutely sue me for breach of contract." Then Jasmine's voice echoed through my speakers. "Relax, babe. Mom and Dad's anniversary is coming up. We will just tell Chloe she has to host it. We will inflate the catering and venue budget by 20 grand and use your dummy LLC as the event vendor. You know she is too desperate for Mommy's approval to actually check the invoices. She will just write the check like she always does to play the good daughter." I hit pause. The silence in my dining room was so absolute it felt like the air had been vacuumed out. Jasmine sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, her perfect posture completely collapsing. Preston looked like he had just been struck by lightning. His arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by the pale, sweaty face of a man who knew he had been caught dead to rights. My parents, Thomas and Evelyn, looked back and forth between the speakers and their golden child. For a split second, I actually thought they might apologize to me. I thought the sheer, undeniable proof of Jasmine's malicious theft would finally shatter the illusion. I was wrong. Evelyn slammed her hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. "How dare you!" she shrieked, her voice completely devoid of the maternal warmth she reserved for my sister. "How dare you spy on your own family in your own home?" I blinked, genuinely stunned by the pivot. "Spy on you?" I asked. "Mom, they just admitted to plotting to steal $20,000 from me to fund Preston's failing company. Did you not hear a word of what was just played?" Thomas stood up, towering over the table, pointing a thick finger at my face. "You put cameras in the house to trap your sister. That is sick, Chloe. You have always been out to get her. Preston is family. His business needs support, and you have more than enough money sitting around doing nothing." I stood up, kicking my chair back so hard it scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Doing nothing," I repeated, my voice rising for the first time. "I work for every single dime I make. I am not a bank, And I am certainly not a slush fund for a failing app developer who cannot even secure legitimate funding. Preston jumped up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. You do not know anything about business, he barked, stepping around the table toward me. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clearly trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. Startups hit rough patches. That is just how the industry works. We were going to pay you back once the next funding round closed. It was an internal family loan. A loan requires asking, I said, holding my ground as he stepped into my personal space. What you two planned was fraud. Jasmine suddenly burst into real tears this time. They were loud, ugly sobs. She ran around the table and buried her face in our mother's shoulder. Mom, make her stop, she cried. She is trying to ruin my marriage. She is trying to send Preston to jail because she is jealous that nobody wants to marry her. Evelyn wrapped her arms around Jasmine, stroking her hair, while glaring at me with absolute hatred. You listen to me, Chloe, my mother snarled. You will delete that recording right now. You will write a check for $25,000 to cover the anniversary party and the stress you have caused your sister today. If you do not do this, you are no longer welcome at our church. You are no longer welcome at Sunday dinners. You will be completely cut off. I looked at the four of them standing united against me. They were willing to protect a thief simply because she was the favorite. They were willing to sacrifice my financial security to protect the illusion of Preston's success. I did not delete the recording. Instead, I took 2 steps back and walked over to the security panel mounted on the wall near the front door. I entered my override code and placed my finger over the red panic button. What are you doing? Preston demanded, his voice wavering as he realized I was not backing down. I am initiating the panic protocol on my alarm system, I said, my voice ice cold. Once I press this button, a loud alarm will sound and a call goes directly to the police dispatch. They will be here in exactly 4 minutes. You all have 3 minutes to get out of my house before I press it and report an attempted extortion. Thomas stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. You would not dare call the police on your own parents. You are bluffing. I pressed the button. A loud, blaring siren immediately erupted from the wall panel, followed by a mechanical voice echoing through the house. Emergency dispatch initiated. Authorities have been notified. Panic erupted. Jasmine screamed and grabbed her designer purse, practically shoving our mother out of the way to get to the front door. Preston grabbed his coat, muttering curses under his breath, looking terrified that a squad car might actually pull up and start asking questions about his business finances. Thomas and Evelyn scrambled toward the exit, but my father stopped on the porch. The sky outside had opened up, pouring cold rain onto the driveway. He turned back to look at me standing safely inside my warm, brightly lit home. You are dead to us, Chloe, he shouted over the sound of the siren and the rain. Do not ever call us again. You are a bitter, lonely woman, and you will die a bitter, lonely woman. I looked at him, the man who was supposed to protect me, standing in the rain, defending the people who tried to rob me. I am not lonely, I said quietly. I am finally free. I slammed the heavy oak door shut, locked the deadbolt, and quickly keyed in my cancellation code to stop the alarm before the police actually arrived. The house was instantly quiet again, save for the sound of the rain hitting the windows. I leaned my back against the door and let out a long, shaky breath. My hands were trembling slightly. I had done it. I had finally stood up to them and cut the cord. I walked into the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water, needing a moment to process the fact that I had just evicted my entire family. But before I could even take a sip, my tablet sitting on the kitchen island chimed loudly. It was an urgent push notification from my banking app. I frowned, setting the glass down. I swiped open the screen and opened my secure email inbox. There was a message marked highly urgent from a major debt collection agency. The subject line made my stomach drop completely to the floor. Final notice of foreclosure intent. I opened the attached document and my eyes scanned the legal jargon. It was a mortgage default notice for a property I did not live in. It was the address of my parents' house. But right there, listed as the primary financial guarantor, was my name and my social security number. The betrayal was not just $20,000 for a fake anniversary party. It went much, much deeper than I ever could have imagined. They had not just tried to rob me today. They had already stolen my financial identity years ago. By Tuesday morning, my phone was vibrating so constantly it felt like a hornet nest buzzing on my nightstand. Jasmine had wasted no time launching her digital attack against me. I opened Instagram and there she was on a live video broadcasting to hundreds of people in our local community. She had strategically wiped off her makeup to look exhausted and heartbroken. She was sitting in her expensive living room crying about toxic, unsupportive family members trying to tear a young black marriage apart. She painted herself as the victim of a jealous older sister who used money to control and manipulate our parents. She never mentioned the security camera recording, and she certainly never mentioned her plan to steal $20,000 from me. The text messages from extended family members and women from our church rolled in relentlessly. Aunt Sheila called me a disgrace to the family name. A church elder texted me saying I needed to pray for a softer heart and remember to respect my parents. Cousins I had not spoken to in years were suddenly flooding my inbox, calling me a bitter woman who was trying to ruin her sister's happiness. They all believed Jasmine's performance without even asking for my side of the story. I did not reply to a single one of them. I was too busy downloading the 50 pages of mortgage documents my lawyer had overnighted to me. Wednesday afternoon, I was chairing the quarterly event planning committee at the local community center. This was a critical part of my career. I sat at the head of the large glass conference table, reviewing vendor contracts with 10 of the most influential event organizers and hospitality executives in the city. These were my professional peers, people who respected my work and whose recommendations could make or break my future promotions. The atmosphere was serious and focused as we debated catering budgets for the upcoming summer festivals. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the conference room swung open loudly, hitting the wall. Evelyn and Jasmine walked in completely uninvited. My mother was dressed in a conservative navy blue church suit, holding a crumpled tissue in her hand. Jasmine walked slightly behind her, looking down at the floor like a wounded bird. The entire committee stopped talking and turned to stare at the intrusion. Evelyn stepped right up to the end of the conference table, directly across from where I was sitting. "Chloe," she said, her voice shaking with perfectly practiced maternal grief. "I am so sorry to interrupt your important meeting, but we have nowhere else to turn. Why are you doing this to us? Why are you trying to leave your own parents to starve in the streets just because you are angry at your sister?" The committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few exchanged shocked glances. My mother was trying to destroy my professional reputation right in front of my colleagues. She was painting me as a greedy, ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her elders. It was the ultimate power play designed to use public shame to force my submission. She thought I would drag her into the hallway to avoid a scene and agree to whatever she wanted just to make her go away. I did not raise my voice. I did not act embarrassed or flustered. I calmly closed my laptop and picked up the thick red folder sitting next to my coffee cup. I stood up from my chair, walked the length of the conference table, and handed the folder directly to my mother. "What is this?" Evelyn asked, eyeing the folder suspiciously but taking it anyway. Her crying suddenly stopped. "Those are the forensic handwriting analysis reports and the original loan origination documents for the mortgage on your house," I said loudly enough for every single person in the room to hear. "The mortgage you and Dad took out 5 years ago. The one where you forged my signature and used my social security number to secure a loan because your credit was ruined from paying off Jasmine's credit card debt." Jasmine's head snapped up. Her fake wounded bird routine vanished instantly, replaced by sheer panic. Evelyn's face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. She opened the folder with trembling hands, staring at the highlighted copies of the forged signatures that matched her own handwriting perfectly. "You did not come here because you are starving," I continued, my voice steady and completely devoid of pity. "You came here because I froze my credit yesterday morning and reported the fraudulent loan to the federal authorities and the banking commission. The bank is foreclosing on the house because without my pristine credit history propping up your lies, the entire house of cards has finally collapsed. Evelyn dropped the folder, the heavy stack of papers scattered across the polished floor of the community center. She grabbed the edge of the conference table, swaying on her feet. "Oh, Lord," she gasped, clutching her chest. She genuinely looked like she was about to pass out, but I knew half of it was theatrics to avoid accountability and garner sympathy from the strangers in the room. She slowly sank to the floor, sobbing loudly and rocking back and forth. Jasmine tried to grab my arm. "Chloe, how could you do this to Mom?" She hissed, her voice vicious and low. "You are going to send her to jail. You are a monster." I stepped back easily, avoiding her grasp. "I did not do this," I replied, looking down at them. "You all did this to yourselves when you decided I was nothing but a resource to be drained. Now please gather your fraudulent paperwork and leave my place of work before I have building security escort you out for trespassing." I did not wait for them to respond. I turned my back on them, walked right back to my seat at the head of the table, and opened my laptop. The room was dead silent save for my mother's theatrical sobbing. I looked around at my stunned colleagues, who were staring at me with a mixture of shock and profound respect. "Shall we continue reviewing the floral budget?" I asked, calmly tapping my pen against my notebook. Within 60 seconds, Jasmine had dragged our mother out of the room, leaving the forged documents scattered on the floor behind them. I had survived their ambush and turned their public shaming campaign into their own public execution. But as I went back to my meeting, I knew Preston was still out there. And with the family money officially cut off, he was about to become desperate enough to try something even worse. It did not take long for my prediction to come true. By Thursday morning, the financial drought had pushed Preston into full-blown panic mode. I made a few discreet phone calls to some corporate contacts I had in the local tech investment circle. It turns out Preston's revolutionary startup was nothing more than a hollow shell. His seed investors had discovered that over $100,000 of their capital was missing. They were threatening him with a massive lawsuit and criminal charges by the end of the week if he did not produce the funds immediately. With my credit frozen and my parents' house going into foreclosure, his last lifeline had been completely severed. He was a cornered animal. And cornered animals always make stupid mistakes. That afternoon, I was standing in the sleek marble lobby of my hospitality firm waiting for a client when I heard shouting near the entrance. I turned around and saw Preston. He was wearing a wrinkled suit, looking disheveled and frantic. He was trying to push past the building security guards demanding to be led upstairs. "Let me go," he yelled, his face red with rage. "I need to speak to the vice president of this company right now. One of your directors, Chloe, is a thief. She embezzled money from my family business, and I am here to press charges." He was banking on his privilege, assuming that as a white man in a corporate space, his loud accusations would automatically be taken seriously and get me fired on the spot to save the company from a public relations nightmare. My boss, Richard, stepped out of the nearby elevator hearing the commotion. He looked at me with raised eyebrows. I simply held up a hand, signaling that I had it under control. I walked over to the security desk. "Let him go," I told the guards. They stepped back, but stayed close. Preston sneered at me, adjusting his jacket, trying to look triumphant. "You are finished, Chloe," he spat. "I am telling your boss everything." I stepped in so close to him that I could smell the stale coffee and pure fear radiating off his skin. "Go ahead and tell him," I whispered, my voice deadly calm. "But while you do that, I will go ahead and forward the background check I just ran on your dummy company to the local authorities. The one that shows you did not lose your investors' money in a volatile market. It shows you transferred it to offshore accounts to pay off $75,000 in underground sports betting debts." Preston's smug expression completely dissolved. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. "You are facing federal prison, Preston," I continued, never breaking eye contact. And if you ever step foot near my office or say my name again, I will personally hand deliver those bank statements to the district attorney. Now get out of my building." He backed away from me, stumbling slightly before turning and practically running out the glass revolving doors. He looked completely broken. I took a deep breath, smoothed my skirt, and went back to work. I thought that would be the end of the drama for the week, but I was underestimating the sheer audacity of my family. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was my father, Thomas. I almost did not answer, but curiosity got the best of me. When I picked up, he sounded like a completely different man. He was weeping softly. "Chloe, please do not hang up," he begged, his voice cracking. "You were right about everything. Preston is a fraud and Jasmine has been lying to us. We kicked them out of the house. We have nothing left and the community is talking. We are so ashamed." I listened quietly as he poured on the guilt and the tears. He told me they had canceled the massive anniversary party, but they desperately needed to host a small, intimate community gathering to clear the air and save whatever dignity our family had left. "We just need you to consult on this one last event, Chloe," he pleaded. "We secured a date at the Grand Atrium, but we do not know how to manage the vendors. Please just help us this one last time. We want to publicly apologize to you in front of everyone." The Grand Atrium was one of the most exclusive and expensive venues in Atlanta. There was no way my bankrupt parents could afford to book it on their own. The math was not adding up, and my instincts were screaming that this was another trap. But I did not hang up. I did not yell at him for his sudden change of heart. Instead, a slow smile spread across my face. I realized this was my chance to end this once and for all. "I will meet you there tomorrow morning to go over the contracts," I told him softly. "I will make sure this is an event nobody will ever forget." The next morning, the Atlanta humidity was already thick by the time I pulled my car into the VIP parking lot of the Grand Atrium. The venue was a sprawling glass and steel architectural masterpiece. It was also one of my corporate clients. I knew the general manager, the head chef, and the lighting director by their first names. My parents did not know this. They assumed my job in hospitality meant I just booked hotel rooms and ordered catering trays. When I walked into the main ballroom, Thomas and Evelyn were already sitting at a small table near the stage. They looked small and exhausted. They did not look like the arrogant people who had demanded $20,000 from me just days ago. When they saw me, Evelyn actually stood up and tried to hug me. I stepped to the side, letting her arms grasp at empty air. "Let us just get down to business," I said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "Dad said you needed help managing the vendors for a small community gathering to clear the air. Show me what you have so far." Thomas slid a thick white folder across the table. His hands were shaking. "Thank you, Chloe," he mumbled, looking down at his lap. "We just want to make things right. We invited the church elders and the community leaders. We are going to publicly apologize for the misunderstanding and show everyone that our family is united." I opened the folder. The first page was a layout schematic for the ballroom. They had requested seating for 200 people. That was not a small, intimate gathering. That was a full-scale production. But it was the second page that made my blood run cold. It was a preliminary contract for the catering and the bar service. At the very bottom, under the billing and beneficiary section, I saw the name of the registered LLC that was supposed to receive the remaining funds from the ticket sales. It was Preston's Dummy Corporation. I stared at the paper, keeping my expression completely blank. They had not kicked Jasmine and Preston out. They had not seen the light. This entire apology event was a massive ticketed gala. They were charging the community $200 a plate under the guise of a family celebration. They were going to crowdsource the money to secretly pay off Preston's gambling debts before he was indicted for federal fraud. And they wanted me to secure the venue because I could get the deposit waived. They were trying to use me to facilitate a massive financial scam against our own community. I looked up from the folder. Thomas and Evelyn were watching me with wide, innocent eyes. They truly believed I was stupid enough to fall for it. They thought my desire for their love would completely blind me to their grift. This looks very organized, I said, forcing a warm smile onto my face. In fact, I think this is exactly what the family needs. You two look so tired from all this stress. Why do you not go home and rest? I will take over from here. I will handle all the vendor contracts, the catering, and the guest list. Leave everything to me. Evelyn let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief. Oh, Chloe, she gushed, pressing her hand to her chest. I knew you would come through for us. You have always been such a good daughter. God will bless you for this. I watched them walk out of the ballroom arm in arm, congratulating themselves on manipulating the family mule one more time. The moment the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind them, I picked up my phone and called the general manager of the Grand Atrium. He was in his office upstairs. Within 10 minutes, we had legally commandeered the event. As the corporate contractor for the building, I had the authority to override the preliminary booking. I set an ironclad, devastating trap and spent the next 3 days making sure every single detail was absolutely perfect. Saturday night arrived. The ballroom was transformed into a vision of luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the white linen tables. 200 members of our community, including church elders, local business owners, and even some of Preston's tech investors, had arrived. They were all dressed in their finest evening wear. Standing near the grand entrance were Jasmine Preston Thomas and Evelyn. They were dressed to the nines, playing the perfect united family. Jasmine was wearing a stunning silk gown, smiling brightly as she greeted guests. Preston was standing right beside her, shaking hands and collecting heavy, thick envelopes of cash donations that people had brought to support his new community fund. My parents were beaming, soaking in the respect and admiration of their peers. It was a flawless performance. I stood alone in the VIP balcony on the second floor, looking down at them. I was wearing a sharp, tailored emerald green suit. I held a master microphone in my right hand. Down on the main floor, Preston tapped his champagne glass with a silver spoon. The room gradually quieted down as the guests turned their attention toward the stage. Preston stepped up to the podium, gripping the edges with both hands to project an image of confident leadership. Thank you all for being here tonight. Preston began, his voice booming through the sound system. Family is the foundation of our community. And tonight we are not just celebrating Thomas and Evelyn's beautiful marriage. We are launching a new initiative to support local entrepreneurs. Your generous donations tonight are going to build generational wealth for our future. I signaled the audio technician in the sound booth. Preston's microphone went completely dead. He tapped it a few times, looking confused. Hello, he said, leaning closer to the dead mic. Can we get the sound back, please? I flipped the switch on my own microphone. My voice echoed across the massive ballroom, crisp and clear. Good evening, everyone, I said. 200 heads snapped up toward the VIP balcony. Jasmine dropped the stack of envelopes she was holding. Evelyn gasped, covering her mouth. Preston's face turned the color of chalk. I am Chloe. I continued walking slowly down the curved grand staircase toward the main floor. Thomas and Evelyn's daughter, and the official event coordinator for tonight. I hope you are all enjoying the champagne, because unfortunately, this event is entirely fraudulent. The room erupted into shocked murmurs. I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked right past my freezing, terrified family. I stood in the center of the ballroom floor. If you turn your attention to the main projection screens behind the stage, you will see exactly why we are all here, I announced. The two massive 20-foot screens dropped down from the ceiling. The high-definition projectors clicked on, illuminating the dark room. On the left screen was a blown-up copy of the forged mortgage documents showing exactly how Thomas and Evelyn had stolen my financial identity to bail out Jasmine's credit card debt. On the right screen were Preston's offshore bank statements clearly showing the embezzlement of investor funds to pay for illegal sports betting. And right in the middle, I projected the secret catering contract for tonight, showing that every single dollar you donated at the door was funneling directly into Preston's personal bank account to keep him out of federal prison, I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Complete chaos broke out in the crowd. The church elders stood up in outrage. The tech investors who had attended started shouting, pointing aggressively at Preston, who was now desperately trying to back away from the podium. As the legal contractor for this venue, I am officially canceling this event. Due to criminal fraud, I declared, speaking over the noise. Building security has already locked the doors, and the police have been called to assist the investors in retrieving their stolen funds. For those of you who donated electronically, I have already intercepted the payment gateway and refunded every single dollar directly back into your bank accounts. I turned around to face my family. They were completely surrounded by angry guests and approaching security guards. Jasmine was sobbing uncontrollably, her golden child facade shattered into a million pieces. Thomas and Evelyn were clutching each other, looking completely destroyed, realizing their pristine social image was dead and buried. "You wanted me to host," I said, looking right into my mother's terrified eyes. "I hosted. Now get out of my building." I stared at the glowing screen of my tablet, my mind struggling to process the legal jargon glaring back at me. I read the words, "Final Notice of Foreclosure Intent," over and over again, until the letters began to blur. It felt as if the floor had suddenly dropped out from underneath my kitchen island. I had just kicked my family out into the rain for trying to steal $20,000 from me, but this document proved their betrayal was infinitely worse. My hands shook as I opened the PDF attachment. There, listed directly beneath my parents' names, was my own name and my social security number, serving as the primary financial guarantor for a $300,000 mortgage refinance. The origination date was stamped exactly 5 years ago. I closed my eyes as a sickening memory suddenly surfaced. 5 years ago, I was 25 years old, just starting my climb up the corporate ladder. I had painstakingly built a perfect credit score, living frugally while my peers were out partying. I remembered my mother Evelyn calling me one evening asking for my social security number and a copy of my driver's license. She claimed she was setting up a comprehensive family life insurance policy and needed my details as a beneficiary. I had handed over my most sensitive information without a second thought because she was my mother. I trusted her implicitly. I dropped the tablet onto the counter and sprinted up the stairs to my home office. I fired up my laptop and immediately logged into all 3 major credit bureaus. I requested my full credit history. When the reports populated on my monitor, the breath left my lungs. There it was, a massive delinquent mortgage anchoring down my otherwise flawless financial profile. The account was 90 days past due and the bank was preparing to seize the property. But they had not just taken out the loan to fix the roof or pay for medical bills. I dug deeper into the public property records available online, matching the dates of the mortgage payout. 5 years ago was the exact same time Jasmine had completely maxed out 6 different credit cards, trying to keep up appearances with her wealthy friends. It was also the exact same year my parents mysteriously found the cash to buy her a brand new luxury vehicle for her birthday. The sickening puzzle pieces finally snapped together. My parents had secretly remortgaged their home using my pristine credit history just to bail Jasmine out of her massive debt and fund her lavish lifestyle. They had literally stolen my financial identity and risked my future to subsidize my sister's irresponsibility. And now that Preston had squandered all their money on his failing startup, they could no longer afford the secret mortgage payments. Hot, angry tears spilled down my cheeks. I did not wipe them away. For 35 years, I had bent over backwards to earn the love and respect of Thomas and Evelyn. I had paid for weddings, I had hosted holidays, I had played the role of the dutiful, obedient daughter. And the entire time they viewed me as nothing more than an asset to be drained, a human shield to protect their golden child from the consequences of her own actions. I reached for my phone and dialed the emergency 24-hour hotline for my bank's fraud department. A representative answered on the second ring. "I need to report a severe case of identity theft." I told him, my voice remarkably steady despite the storm raging inside my chest. "I need to place an immediate hard freeze on my social security number across all bureaus, and I need to initiate a fraud investigation on a mortgage loan that was opened using forged signatures." I spent the next 2 hours on the phone, meticulously locking down every single aspect of my financial life. I changed every password, I rerouted my direct deposits, and I sent an urgent email to my corporate attorney demanding we pull the original physical loan documents from the county clerk office first thing Monday morning. I knew my mother. She was arrogant enough to simply sign my name herself, assuming I would never find out. By the time I finally closed my laptop, it was past midnight. The rain was still beating against my office window. The initial shock had completely burned away, leaving nothing behind but cold, calculated clarity. My family thought I was just a bitter single woman they could bully into submission. They thought my refusal to host their anniversary party was just a temporary tantrum. They had absolutely no idea that I now held the power to send them to federal prison. I walked over to my printer and collected the thick stack of credit reports and property records. I slid them carefully into a bright red folder and placed it right in the center of my desk. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. Jasmine would never accept defeat. By tomorrow, she would be spinning a web of lies, crying to the extended family, and trying to destroy my reputation in the community to force my hand. She would try to wage a public war against me. I looked down at the red folder, my ultimate weapon resting quietly under the desk lamp. Let them come, I whispered to the empty room. Let them try to destroy me. Because when I strike back, I will not just defend myself. I will burn their entire world to the ground, and I will make sure everyone they know sees the ashes. I woke up Tuesday morning feeling like I had not slept a single minute. The red folder was exactly where I left it, sitting squarely in the middle of my desk under the cold light of my office lamp. I had spent the entire night tracking every financial move my parents had made over the last 5 years, documenting every lie and every stolen dollar. I felt physically exhausted, but my mind was completely locked in. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower, letting the hot water wash away the lingering shock. Today was going to be a battle, and I needed to put on my armor. I chose a tailored charcoal gray suit and my favorite pearl earrings. I needed to look untouchable. But the moment I walked into my kitchen to pour a cup of coffee, my phone started vibrating on the marble counter. It was not just one text. It was a continuous, relentless buzzing that made the device slide across the smooth stone. I picked it up and saw my notification screen completely flooded. I had 47 unread text messages and over 100 new tags on Instagram. The family group chat, which was usually just filled with prayer hands and holiday recipes, had turned into a digital firing squad. I unlocked my phone and tapped on the first message from Aunt Valerie. She was my mother's oldest sister and a highly respected woman in our church. Her text read, "I cannot believe what I am hearing this morning, Chloe. You threw your own mother and father out into the freezing rain over a simple party budget. You are a disgrace to this family, and you need to get on your knees and ask God to remove that bitter jealousy from your heart." Right below that was a message from Deacon Hayes, a man who had known me since I was in Sunday school. His message was just as sharp. "Chloe, we as Black people have to stick together in this world. Tearing down your sister's marriage because you are unhappy with your own single status is not the way of the Lord. Call your parents immediately and apologize." My stomach twisted. They had completely spun the narrative. I opened Instagram to see exactly what Jasmine had done. The first thing that popped up on my feed was a 20-minute live video Jasmine had posted just an hour earlier. It already had hundreds of views and comments from our extended community. I tapped the video, and Jasmine's face filled my screen. She had strategically wiped off all her makeup to look pale and exhausted. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she was sitting on the floor of her expensive living room, the very same living room that my stolen credit had helped finance. She was hugging her knees to her chest, looking directly into the camera with tears streaming down her face. "I did not want to bring family business to the internet," Jasmine said, her voice trembling perfectly. "But I am just so heartbroken, and I know a lot of you have been asking why the anniversary party is canceled. It is because my sister Chloe has decided to cut our parents off. She screamed at them and threw them out of her house into the pouring rain last night." Jasmine paused to wipe a fake tear away, sniffing loudly. Preston and I are working so hard to build our business and create generational wealth for our community. But Chloe has always resented my marriage. She has always been jealous that I found love. She demanded we pay her thousands of dollars to attend the party, and when we said we could not afford her extortion, she threatened to call the police on our own mother. Please just pray for her. Pray that she finds peace so she stops trying to tear down young black marriages. I stared at the screen, completely mesmerized by the sheer sociopathic ease with which she lied. She took the truth, inverted it completely, and served it up to a community she knew would eat it without question. She weaponized our cultural values against me. She knew that in our circles, protecting the image of a successful black marriage and respecting your elders were paramount. She used those exact triggers to paint me as an angry, bitter single black woman who hated her own family. I scrolled through the comments under the video. People I had known my entire life were dragging my name through the mud. Cousins who had happily drank the open bar at Jasmine's wedding, the wedding I paid for, were calling me selfish and toxic. Church ladies who had smiled in my face last Sunday were typing paragraphs about how money had turned my heart cold. Not a single person reached out to ask for my side of the story. Not one person paused to wonder why the reliable, responsible daughter would suddenly snap. They just blindly accepted the word of the golden child. A younger version of me would have completely broken down. A younger version of me would have frantically typed out paragraphs defending myself, trying to explain the security camera footage and the stolen $20,000. I would have begged them to believe me. But the woman standing in the kitchen holding the red folder was not that girl anymore. I realized something profound in that moment. You cannot argue with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. My family and their enablers did not want the truth. They wanted a scapegoat. They needed me to be the villain so Jasmine could remain the victim and my parents could remain the martyrs. If they admitted that I was right, they would have to admit that their entire family structure was built on a foundation of abuse and lies. I turned off my phone screen, cutting off Jasmine's fake sobbing. I did not reply to Aunt Valerie. I did not text Deacon Hayes back. I did not leave a single comment on the Instagram video. Silence is often the most terrifying response you can give to a narcissist, because it deprives them of the chaotic energy they feed on. By not engaging, I was letting them punch themselves out. I drank my coffee in complete silence, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The digital sabotage was brutal, but it was also incredibly short-sighted. Jasmine was playing checkers, trying to win the public opinion of our small community for the week. I was playing chess, preparing to dismantle her entire life by the end of the month. I picked up my briefcase, slid the red folder carefully inside, and walked out the door to my car. I had a major event planning committee meeting tomorrow afternoon at the community center. I knew exactly how my mother operated. The social media attack was just the opening bombardment. Her next move would be a physical ambush to humiliate me in front of my professional peers. She wanted to hit my career where it hurt the most. I smiled as I merged onto the Atlanta highway. I hoped she would show up. I genuinely hoped she would bring Jasmine with her, because they had no idea that the silent daughter they were currently mocking online was walking into that boardroom armed with enough federal evidence to put them both behind bars. I pulled into the parking lot of the Oakwood Community Center right on time. The afternoon sun was glaring, but my mind was completely cool. I grabbed my briefcase, feeling the satisfying weight of the red folder inside, and walked into the glass front building. The event planning committee meeting was taking place in the main executive boardroom. This was not just a casual get-together. Seated around the long mahogany table were some of the most influential figures in Atlanta corporate hospitality. There was Angela, the director of City Cultural Affairs, and Michael, a senior coordinator for the largest charity galas in the state. These were my peers, but they were also the gatekeepers to my future career advancements. Earning their respect had taken me years of flawless execution and late nights. I took my seat at the head of the table and opened my laptop. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded exactly as planned. We were discussing the vendor allocations for the upcoming summer festival, and I was walking them through a complex budget spreadsheet. The room was focused and professional. Then the heavy wooden double doors at the back of the boardroom swung open so hard they slammed against the drywall. The entire committee stopped talking and turned around. Standing in the doorway was my mother Evelyn, and right behind her was Jasmine. My mother had dressed specifically for the part she was about to play. Instead of her usual vibrant church suits, she was wearing a faded, oversized cardigan and slacks, looking intentionally disheveled. Jasmine was holding her smartphone up with the camera lens pointed directly at me. The little red recording light was blinking. She was live streaming the entire thing. Chloe Evelyn wailed, her voice echoing off the glass walls of the boardroom. She took a stumbling step forward, pressing a crumpled tissue to her face. "Oh my God. Chloe, please. We have nowhere else to go." Angela and Michael exchanged shocked, uncomfortable glances. The other board members shifted in their plush leather chairs, completely bewildered by the intrusion. Evelyn did not walk toward me immediately. She made sure to stand near the center of the room so every single person at the table had a clear view of her manufactured suffering. "Why are you doing this to us?" My mother cried out, her voice shaking with perfectly rehearsed despair. "Your father and I gave you everything. We worked our fingers to the bone to put food in your mouth and clothes on your back. And now that you are a wealthy corporate director, you throw us out into the freezing rain." I sat perfectly still. I did not close my laptop. I did not break eye contact with her. I just watched her perform. "You left us to starve." Chloe. Evelyn continued, taking another dramatic step forward. "You locked us out of the house because we could not afford to pay your extortion fees for a simple family party. We are your parents. How can you sit in this fancy room with all these important people, knowing your own flesh and blood is suffering because of your bitter jealousy?" Jasmine stepped out from behind our mother, keeping the phone camera steady on my face. She wanted to capture my reaction. She wanted to record me losing my temper, screaming, or breaking down in tears, so she could show the entire internet that I was the unstable, angry woman she claimed I was. "Tell them the truth," Chloe Jasmine demanded loudly, making sure her voice was picked up by the microphone. "Tell your colleagues how you demanded $20,000 from Mom and Dad and threatened to call the police when they begged for mercy. You are a monster. You are trying to destroy our family just because you are miserable and alone." The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. I could feel the eyes of my professional peers darting back and forth between me and the two women causing a scene. In the corporate world, reputation is everything. Public outbursts like this were considered massive liabilities. My mother knew exactly what she was doing. She was banking on the fact that I would be so terrified of losing my job and my professional standing that I would instantly surrender. She assumed I would jump up, grab her by the arm, and drag her into the hallway to negotiate a peace treaty just to make the embarrassment stop. She thought the shame of a public family dispute would break me. Instead, I let the silence stretch. I let every single person in that room absorb the sheer audacity of my mother's words. I let Jasmine keep her camera rolling. I slowly took a sip of my water, placed the glass back onto the coaster, and folded my hands neatly on top of the mahogany table. "Are you quite finished?" I asked. My voice was low, but it carried clearly across the large room. It did not shake. It held absolutely no emotion. Evelyn faltered for a fraction of a second, clearly thrown by my complete lack of panic. She expected me to be frantic. She expected me to beg her to lower her voice. She quickly recovered and let out a loud, dramatic sob, clutching her chest as if her heart was breaking. "Look at how cold she is," Evelyn cried out, turning to look at Angela and Michael, directly trying to pull them into her performance. "Look at what money has done to my daughter. She does not even care that her father is having chest pains from the stress. She took all our savings, and now she is leaving us with nothing. Please, someone talk some sense into her." I nodded slowly. "I understand," I said, keeping my tone conversational and light. You came here today to my place of business to announce to my colleagues that I have stolen from you and left you destitute. You came here to put on a show. It is not a show, Jasmine snapped, stepping closer. It is the truth, and the whole world is watching you right now. That is excellent news, Jasmine, I replied, giving her a cold, tight smile. Because I think the world deserves to see exactly how this family operates. I reached down and unlatched the brass buckles of my leather briefcase. The metallic clicks echoed sharply in the quiet room. I slid my hand inside, and my fingers brushed against the thick, glossy cardstock of the red folder. I pulled it out and set it down right next to my laptop. My mother stopped crying. Her eyes locked onto the red folder. Even from across the room, she recognized the bright crimson color of the priority envelopes used by the Federal Banking Commission. A tiny flicker of genuine fear finally cracked through her theatrical mask. She had come to my office expecting to fight a terrified little girl. She had no idea she was about to face a firing squad. I slid the red folder across the smooth mahogany wood. It stopped right at the edge of the table, inches away from my mother's trembling hands. Open it, I instructed. My voice was completely flat, devoid of the panic she had been counting on. Jasmine shifted her phone, trying to get a better angle of the folder, thinking I was about to hand over my bank statements or a written apology. She was still streaming to her followers, eager to show them the exact moment I surrendered. Evelyn hesitated. Her eyes darted around the room, looking at the faces of my colleagues, before she slowly reached out and flipped open the heavy crimson cover. Her eyes darted down to the first page, and all the blood immediately rushed out of her face, leaving her looking like a ghost. What you are looking at, I announced to the entire boardroom, making sure my voice carried over Jasmine's live feed, is a 50-page dossier compiled by my corporate attorney and a certified forensic document examiner. Those are the original loan origination documents for the mortgage refinance you and Dad took out on your house exactly 5 years ago. Michael and Angela were sitting in stunned silence. Michael slowly lowered his pen to the table. Jasmine lowered her phone slightly, her brow furrowing in confusion. She did not know about the mortgage. Our parents had kept that a secret even from their golden child. The same mortgage I continued, where you used my social security number and forged my signature to secure a $300,000 loan. You used my pristine credit history to save your house after you drained your own retirement savings, paying off Jasmine's massive credit card debt. You stole my financial identity to fund her lifestyle while telling me you were setting up a family life insurance policy. Jasmine's jaw dropped. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered loudly onto the boardroom table. The camera lens was now facing the ceiling, but the microphone was still picking up every single word. The live stream she had been so desperate to broadcast to our church and extended family was now capturing the exact moment her entire narrative was destroyed. The victim act was over. Evelyn started to shake her head violently back and forth. "No," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "No, Chloe, you misunderstood. We were going to pay it back. It was just a temporary solution. We are family." "You did not come here today because you are starving," I said, leaning forward, resting my forearms on the table. "You came here to humiliate me into submission because yesterday morning I placed a hard freeze on my credit. I contacted the federal authorities and I formally reported the fraudulent loan to the banking commission. The bank is foreclosing on your house because without my credit history propping up your lies, the entire house of cards has finally collapsed. You are broke because of your own criminal actions, and there is absolutely nothing I will do to stop the consequences." Evelyn dropped the folder. The thick stack of highlighted documents featuring the forensic analysis of her forged handwriting scattered across the polished floor. "Oh, Lord," she gasped loudly, clutching her chest. Her eyes rolled back into her head and her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the carpet in a heap, letting out a dramatic groan as she hit the floor. A few committee members gasped. Angela half stood up from her chair, reaching for her phone to call an ambulance. But I held up my hand, stopping her. I did not move a single muscle. I did not rush around the table. I knew my mother better than anyone in that room. I knew that when she was backed into a corner with absolutely no way to manipulate her way out, she would resort to the ultimate physical distraction. It was a highly calculated theatrical feint designed to shift the focus from her federal crimes to my lack of daughterly compassion. "Get up, Mom," I said, looking down at her over the edge of the table. "You are not having a heart attack. You are just being held accountable for the first time in your life, and your body does not know how to process it. Stop embarrassing yourself in front of my colleagues." Jasmine scrambled to the floor, grabbing her phone and cutting the live feed before grabbing our mother by the arm. She tugged hard, and Evelyn miraculously regained consciousness, sitting up and looking at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. The wounded mother routine was completely gone, replaced by the vicious reality of a woman who had just been caught stealing. "You are sick, Chloe." Jasmine hissed, her voice venomous but shaking with undeniable terror. "You are going to send our parents to prison. You are destroying this family." "I did not do this," I replied smoothly, picking up my water glass. "You all did this to yourselves when you decided I was nothing but a resource to be drained. I simply stopped being the bank. Now please gather your fraudulent paperwork and leave my place of work before I have building security escort you both out for trespassing." I did not wait for them to respond. I turned my back on them, sat down squarely in my chair, and opened my laptop. The room was dead silent save for the frantic rustling of paper as Jasmine gathered the scattered documents from the floor. She practically dragged our mother out of the boardroom. The heavy doors clicked shut behind them, sealing them out of my professional space forever. I took a deep breath, letting the silence wash over the room for a few seconds. I looked around at my stunned colleagues. They were staring at me with a mixture of profound shock and immense respect. I had just dismantled a public ambush without raising my voice, without losing my composure, and without breaking a single professional boundary. I had protected my peace and my career in one swift move. "Shall we continue reviewing the floral budget?" I asked, calmly tapping my pen against my notebook. Michael let out a slow breath and nodded, opening his folder. "Yes," he said, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Let us look at the floral budget, Chloe." I had survived their workplace attack, and I had turned Jasmine's social media weapon directly back onto her. Everyone watching that live stream had just heard the absolute truth. But as I went back to my spreadsheets, I knew the war was not over yet. With the parents facing federal charges and foreclosure, the financial drought was about to push Preston into full-blown panic mode, and a desperate man with failing tech investors was bound to try something even more reckless. By Thursday morning, the absolute reality of my financial freeze had settled over my family like a suffocating blanket. For my entire adult life, I had been the invisible safety net. Whenever Jasmine overspent, or my parents mismanaged their retirement, I was the one expected to magically produce the funds to keep up their pristine country club image. But now, with my credit locked down, and the Federal Banking Commission breathing down my parents' necks, that pipeline of free money was permanently shut off. The Golden family was finally being forced to live in the real world, and the real world was completely unforgiving. I was sitting in my home office reviewing catering contracts when my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID showed the name Julian. Julian was a senior financial analyst at a prominent venture capital firm in downtown Atlanta. We frequently collaborated on large-scale corporate retreats for his partners, so we had developed a solid professional friendship. The tech and finance sector in this city is a surprisingly small, tight-knit community. If someone sneezes in a boardroom on Monday, everyone in the financial district knows about it by Wednesday. I answered the phone with a warm greeting, but Julian skipped the small talk entirely. "Chloe," he said, his voice hushed as if he was speaking from a quiet hallway. "I need to ask you a personal question. Your sister Jasmine is married to that guy Preston, right? The one who pitches that supply chain logistics app at all the networking mixers." I leaned back in my desk chair, setting my pen down. "Yes, that is my brother-in-law," I replied. "Why do you ask?" Julian let out a heavy sigh. "Because his entire company is currently going up in flames, and it is about to get incredibly ugly." I know one of the angel investors who put seed money into his startup last year. A guy named Harrison. Harrison just called me asking for a recommendation for a corporate fraud attorney. I felt a cold, sharp thrill run down my spine. Tell me everything, I said. Julian spilled the details, and the picture he painted was worse than I could have ever imagined. Preston's app was an absolute ghost town. He had promised his investors a working beta version by the third quarter, but his development team had completely stopped working months ago because Preston stopped paying them. The server bills were bouncing. When Harrison demanded a routine audit of the books, Preston panicked and tried to stall. Preston told his investors he had a guaranteed $20,000 family capital injection clearing by the end of the month, Julian explained. He said it was just a temporary cash flow issue. But when Wednesday rolled around, and that money did not materialize, Harrison forced an emergency financial review. I closed my eyes, smiling grimly to myself. The $20,000. That was the exact amount Preston and Jasmine had plotted to steal from me using the fake anniversary party budget. They needed my money just to keep the servers online and delay the audit. Because I had refused to open my checkbook, the clock had officially run out on Preston's lies. It gets worse, Julian continued. The audit showed that over $150,000 of investor capital is completely unaccounted for. It was not lost in bad marketing or poor development. It was systematically transferred out of the company accounts into a series of offshore shell LLCs over the last 8 months. Harrison gave Preston an ultimatum this morning. He has to produce the missing funds by Friday at noon, or Harrison is marching directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation to file criminal charges for wire fraud and embezzlement. I thanked Julian for the warning and hung up the phone. The room was perfectly quiet, but my mind was racing. Friday at noon. It was currently Thursday afternoon. Preston had less than 24 hours to find $150,000. He was completely trapped. He could not secure a bank loan because his company was a sham and he had no collateral. He could not get the money from Thomas and Evelyn because their house was actively in foreclosure and their accounts were under collateral. He could not get the money from Thomas and Evelyn because their house was actively in foreclosure and their accounts were under investigation thanks to the forged mortgage documents I had exposed. The Bank of Chloe was permanently closed. I logged into my home security system and began scrubbing through the exterior camera footage from the previous night. I had a creeping suspicion, and I needed to verify it. I fast-forwarded to around 2 in the morning. Sure enough, a sleek silver Tesla pulled slowly into my neighborhood. It was the exact car Preston leased to look like a successful tech founder. The Tesla parked across the street from my townhome, under the shadow of a large oak tree. It just sat there for nearly 3 hours. Through the infrared camera lens, I could see the glowing cherry of a cigarette lighting up the driver's seat every few minutes. Preston was chain-smoking and staring at my front door. He was losing his mind. He was a cornered animal realizing that the trap had finally snapped shut. White privilege and a tailored suit were not going to save him from federal prison. He needed a massive amount of money, and he needed a scapegoat to blame for his failure. Jasmine had already tried to use social media to frame me as the villain of the family. I knew Preston was desperate enough to try and frame me for his corporate crimes. He knew he could not break into my house. He had witnessed the panic button protocol firsthand on Sunday night. He knew I had cameras everywhere, so if he wanted to force my hand, he had to attack me where I was most vulnerable. He had to attack my livelihood. I watched the silver Tesla finally pull away on the recorded footage, disappearing into the early morning fog. He was not going to run. Narcissists never run when they think they can still manipulate their way out of a consequence. They double down. He was going to come for me at my corporate office where he thought I would be too embarrassed to fight back. I turned off the security footage and walked into my closet. I picked out my sharpest navy blue suit for the next day. I made sure my briefcase was packed and my phone was fully charged. Preston thought he was dealing with the old Chloe, the quiet sister, who would do anything to avoid a public scene. He had no idea that I was already 10 steps ahead of him, waiting for him to make his final fatal mistake. Friday morning arrived with a crisp breeze, but the atmosphere inside the global headquarters of my hospitality firm was as controlled and serene as always. Our building is a masterpiece of modern architecture, located in the heart of the downtown financial district. The main lobby is a sprawling expanse of imported white Italian marble floor to ceiling glass windows and hushed acoustic panels that absorb the city noise. It is a space designed to intimidate and impress our high net worth clients. Soft classical music plays from hidden speakers, and the air always smells faintly of fresh orchids and expensive espresso. It was exactly 9:45 when that carefully curated piece was completely shattered. I was upstairs in a glass-walled conference room, wrapping up a morning briefing with my team. Down on the ground floor, the heavy revolving glass doors were abruptly shoved open. Preston marched into the lobby. He was not walking with the measured, confident stride of a successful tech founder. He was walking with the frantic, erratic energy of a man who was watching his entire life burn to the ground. He was wearing the exact same suit he had been wearing in the silver Tesla outside my house at 2 in the morning. It was terribly wrinkled, and his usually perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess. Preston completely ignored the front reception desk. He bypassed the velvet ropes and marched directly toward the secure elevator banks reserved for senior executives. "Excuse me, sir," the young receptionist called out, standing up from her desk. "You need to sign in and present a guest badge to pass this point." Preston did not even look at her. He just kept walking, shoving his way past a group of junior analysts waiting for an elevator. When he reached the polished steel turnstiles, he tried to force his way through without swiping a keycard. An alarm instantly beeped, and the heavy glass gates locked firmly in place. Two uniformed security guards immediately stepped out from their posts near the main pillars. They were large, imposing men, but Preston did not back down. He leaned heavily into his white male privilege, assuming that his tailored suit and his aggressive posture would automatically grant him authority in a corporate space. He puffed out his chest and pointed a shaking finger at the guards. "Do not touch me!" he barked, his voice echoing loudly across the marble lobby. "I am a business owner, and I am here on urgent corporate matters. I need to speak to the vice president of this company right now." "Sir, you are trespassing," the lead guard said, maintaining a calm but firm tone. "You need to step back from the turnstiles and return to the front desk, or we will forcefully remove you from the premises." Preston realized he could not physically push past them, so he decided to deploy his backup plan. He decided to use public humiliation to force the company executives to come down to him. He took a deep breath and began to scream at the top of his lungs. "You need to audit your financial records," Preston yelled, his face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. "One of your senior directors is a criminal. Chloe is a thief. She is embezzling money from this company and siphoning it into her personal accounts." The entire lobby ground to a sudden halt. Visiting clients froze in their tracks. Employees carrying coffee cups stopped dead, staring at the frantic man screaming by the elevators. "She stole from her own family." Preston continued pacing back and forth in front of the security guards like a caged animal. "She is a fraud. She is under federal investigation for stealing thousands of dollars from my business. You are harboring a criminal, and if you do not fire her immediately, I am going to the press. I will make sure this entire company is dragged into a massive public relations scandal." He was betting everything on the traditional corporate response to scandal. He knew that most high-end firms despised bad press more than anything else. He assumed that if he made enough noise and threw around words like embezzlement and federal investigation, the Human Resources Department would simply panic. He thought my vice president would instantly suspend me or terminate me just to protect the brand image. He wanted to strip away my title, my income, and my dignity, all in one swift motion. He wanted to ruin my life before his own life was ruined at noon. Up on the 20th floor, my desk phone began to ring. It was the head of building security. I answered it calmly, listened to his brief report of the situation downstairs, and thanked him. I stood up from my desk, smoothed the wrinkles from my navy blue pencil skirt, and walked out of the conference room. My colleagues looked at me with deep concern, having received instant messages about the commotion in the lobby. I will handle this. I told them, my voice perfectly steady. Please continue the vendor review without me. I walked to the executive elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the steel box descended, I focused on my breathing. I was not angry, I was not embarrassed. I was entirely focused on the final execution of my plan. When the elevator doors silently slid open on the ground floor, the sheer volume of Preston's screaming hit me like a physical wave. He was still ranting to a crowd of stunned onlookers, his face covered in a sheen of terrified sweat. "She is a liar," he screamed, pointing at the ceiling as if I was hiding in the rafters. "She is a manipulative, bitter woman who steals from her own parents to fund her lifestyle. Bring me the vice president right now." My boss, Richard, happened to be crossing the lobby from a breakfast meeting just as Preston hit the climax of his unhinged speech. Richard is a seasoned hospitality veteran who has dealt with every type of crisis imaginable. He took one look at Preston, smelled the absolute desperation radiating from him, and immediately signaled the security guards to move in and physically restrain him. The guard stepped forward, grabbing Preston's arms. He thrashed wildly, trying to break free. "Get your hands off me," he yelled. "Call the police. Have her arrested." Before the guards could drag him backward through the heavy revolving doors, I stepped out of the elevator bay and walked directly onto the polished marble floor. My heels clicked sharply against the stone, cutting through the noise of his struggle. "Wait!" I called out, projecting my voice clearly across the lobby. Richard turned to look at me, his brow furrowed in confusion. The security guards paused, their grip still tight on Preston's arms. Preston stopped thrashing. He looked at me standing there in my immaculate suit, looking completely unbothered by his theatrical performance. He smiled a sick, twisted smile of victory, thinking he had finally broken me, thinking I was coming over to beg him to stop ruining my career. He had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. I stopped just a few feet away from Preston. He was breathing heavily, his tie askew, his eyes wide with a manic gleam. He really thought he had won. He thought he had successfully backed me into a corner where my only option was to surrender my dignity and my money to save my corporate reputation. I turned my attention to my boss, who was watching the scene with a mixture of deep concern and professional annoyance. "Richard the First, apologize for the disruption," I said, keeping my tone conversational and light. "This is my brother-in-law. He is currently going through a severe mental health crisis related to the impending bankruptcy of his startup. I will handle this." Richard nodded slowly, signaling the security guards to maintain their hold but loosen their grip slightly. Preston let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Bankruptcy," he spat, trying to project his voice to the onlookers again. "You are the one who is going bankrupt after I tell them how you stole from your own family." I stepped closer, closing the distance between us until I was standing merely inches away from him. I invaded his personal space exactly the way he had invaded mine in my dining room just 5 days ago. The difference was that I did not need to raise my voice or throw a tantrum to intimidate him. I leaned in close, positioning my face right next to his ear so that only he could hear the words I was about to say. I spoke in a soft, steady whisper. "Harrison called Julian yesterday afternoon." I felt Preston's entire body flinch. His mocking laugh died instantly in his throat. The mention of his lead investor and the venture capital analyst acted like a bucket of ice water poured directly over his head. "Yes, I know everything," I whispered, my voice dropping to a freezing register. "I know about the emergency financial audit. I know about the missing $150,000. And most importantly, Preston, I know exactly where that money went." Preston swallowed hard. A bead of cold sweat rolled down his pale temple. He tried to pull away from me, but the security guards held him firmly in place. "You told Harrison it was a cash flow issue." I continued, my lips barely moving. "You told him you transferred the funds into offshore shell accounts to protect the capital during the beta testing phase. But I ran a quiet background check on those LLCs through my corporate finance contacts. They do not belong to software developers, Preston. They belong to bookies." Preston's breath hitched. His eyes widened in absolute sheer terror. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. "You did not lose that money in a volatile market," I said, making sure every single syllable pierced through his pathetic armor. "You embezzled federal investment funds to pay off $75,000 in underground sports betting debts. You are a gambling addict who stole from wealthy, powerful men who have absolutely zero tolerance for being conned." He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The smug, arrogant tech founder who had tried to lecture me about generational wealth was completely gone. In his place was a terrified little boy staring down the barrel of a loaded gun. "Harrison gave you until noon today to produce the cash," I whispered, glancing quickly at the silver watch on his wrist. "Which means you have exactly 2 hours before he walks into the Federal Bureau of Investigation and files criminal charges for wire fraud." Preston started to shake. Real, uncontrollable tremors racked his shoulders. His legs seemed to lose their strength, and if the guards had not been holding him upright, he would have collapsed onto the marble floor right then and there. "You came here today to ruin my career," I said, leaning back slightly to look him directly in his bloodshot eyes. "You came here hoping to strip away my livelihood because you are drowning. But you have absolutely zero leverage. I am a highly respected executive in this building. You are a desperate criminal counting down the minutes until your arrest. If you ever step foot near my office again, if you ever say my name in public again, I will not even wait for Harrison. I will personally hand-deliver those bank statements to the district attorney myself." Preston looked at me as if he was looking at the devil himself. He was completely broken. The realization that he was going to federal prison had finally crashed down on him, crushing whatever delusion he had left. His lips trembled, but he could not form a single word of defense. "Are we clear, Preston?" I asked loudly enough for Richard and the guards to hear. Preston gave a tiny, frantic nod. I turned back to the security guards. "You can let him go now," I said. "I do not think he will be causing any more trouble." The guards released his arms. Preston stumbled backward, almost tripping over his own feet. He did not look at Richard. He did not look at the crowd of onlookers who were still watching the bizarre, silent exchange. He kept his eyes glued to the floor as he turned around and practically ran toward the revolving doors. He pushed his way out into the busy city street, disappearing into the morning crowd like a frightened ghost. The lobby remained quiet for a moment. Then the normal hum of corporate activity slowly resumed. People went back to their coffees and their meetings. Richard walked over to me, shaking his head. "Are you all right, Chloe?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. "Do you need to take the rest of the day off to deal with this?" I smoothed the lapels of my navy blue suit and smiled warmly at my boss. "I am perfectly fine, Richard," I replied. "Just a minor family disagreement that got slightly out of hand. I am ready to get back to the vendor review." I walked back to the executive elevators feeling lighter than I had in years. I had faced the golden child's husband, the man who thought he could destroy me with his privilege and his loud voice, and I had completely dismantled him with nothing but the truth. He was no longer a threat. He was just a man waiting for the authorities to knock on his door. But as the elevator carried me back up to the 20th floor, my personal cell phone began to vibrate in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the caller ID. It was my father, Thomas. I stared at the screen, letting it ring. I knew exactly why he was calling. With Preston's scam exposed and the house going into foreclosure, the family was completely out of options. The arrogant demands and the public ambushes had failed. Now they were going to try the most dangerous tactic of all. They were going to try to play my heartstrings. I watched my father's name flash across the digital screen of my phone for 4 consecutive rings. I let the silence of the elevator wrap around me, gathering my thoughts. They had tried intimidation. They had tried public humiliation. Now that the walls were entirely closing in, they were going to try the one thing they had never genuinely offered me before: an apology. I pressed the green accept button and lifted the phone to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened. Chloe, my father said. His voice was completely unrecognizable. The loud, booming authority he always used to command the room was entirely gone. He sounded frail, exhausted, and broken. Please, baby, please do not hang up the phone. I stood quietly watching the floor numbers light up on the elevator display. What do you want, Dad? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly neutral. He let out a ragged, wet sigh. It sounded like he had been crying for hours. I am so sorry, Chloe. He wept, his voice cracking. You were right. You were right about everything. Preston is a monster, and Jasmine has been lying to us for years. We had no idea about the embezzlement. We had no idea about the gambling. We just thought they were struggling. I leaned against the cool glass wall of the elevator. My mother and father had literally forged my signature on federal mortgage documents to bail Jasmine out of her own debt, but he was still trying to play the victim. He was still trying to act as though they were just naive parents who had been taken advantage of by a bad son-in-law. Where are they now? I asked. We kicked them out. My father sobbed. Your mother and I threw their bags out onto the front lawn this morning. We told them they are no longer welcome in our home. We are ruined, Chloe. The bank is taking the house, and the community is whispering. Everyone saw what happened at your office, and everyone saw the live video Jasmine posted. Our reputation is completely destroyed. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. They had actively participated in my attempted destruction, and they were only crying now because the gun they pointed at me had backfired. But I needed to know exactly what his angle was. Narcissists do not call to apologize unless they need a massive favor. What exactly do you want, Dad? I asked again. He hesitated for a moment. Then the pitch began. We need to clear the air, he said softly. We need to salvage whatever dignity this family has left. Your mother and I canceled the massive anniversary party. We cannot afford it, and it is not right to celebrate right now anyway. But we need to host a small, scaled-down gathering. Just a few church elders and the close community leaders. I frowned slightly. A small gathering, I repeated. Yes, he rushed to explain. We want to publicly apologize to you, Chloe. We want to stand up in front of the people who matter and admit that we were wrong and that you have always been the true backbone of this family. We want to clear your name and restore our honor, but we need your help. My grip on my phone tightened. How exactly do you need my help to apologize? I asked. We secured a meeting at the Grand Atrium. He said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. It is a luxury venue downtown. The manager agreed to let us use one of their smaller private banquet rooms for a fraction of the cost, but only if we have a certified hospitality director sign off on the vendor liability forms. They know you work in the industry, Chloe. They told us if you come down and consult on the contracts, they will waive the deposit. Please, we just need you to meet us there tomorrow morning to look over the paperwork just this one last time. The elevator doors chimed and slid open to my floor. I stepped out onto the plush carpet of the executive suite, but I did not walk toward my office. I stood completely still in the quiet hallway. The Grand Atrium. It was one of the most exclusive and outrageously expensive event spaces in the entire state of Georgia. You do not book the Grand Atrium for a small, intimate apology dinner. You book the Grand Atrium when you want to put on a massive high society spectacle. My parents were completely bankrupt. Their house was in active foreclosure. There was absolutely zero mathematical possibility that they could afford even the coat check room at that venue, let alone a private banquet hall. The math was not adding up, but the manipulation was crystal clear. My father was lying. They had not kicked Jasmine and Preston out. They had not suddenly seen the light and realized I was the good daughter. They were pivoting the grift. With Preston facing federal wire fraud charges, they were desperate for a massive influx of cash to keep him out of prison. They were using the guise of a family apology to lure me into securing a venue for some kind of large-scale fundraising scam. They thought my lifelong desperate need for their love and approval would completely blind me to the glaring holes in their story. They thought the promise of a public apology would make me compliant. "I am listening, Dad," I said, forcing my voice to soften just enough to sound hesitant. "Please, Chloe," he begged. "We are at rock bottom. If you do not help us secure this venue, we have no way to fix the damage we caused. We will lose everything, including our standing in the church. Meet us at the Grand Atrium tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Just look at the contracts. If you do not like them, you can walk away." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed the keys to the kingdom. My family had spent the entire week attacking my home, my credit, and my corporate reputation. Now they wanted to play a game on my turf. They wanted to run a scam in a venue where I personally knew the general manager, the head chef, and the security director. They were walking blindly into my territory. "All right, Dad," I said, keeping my tone gentle and reassuring. "Do not cry anymore. I will meet you and Mom at the Grand Atrium tomorrow morning. We will go over everything together." "Oh, thank you, baby." My father exhaled, sounding like a man who had just won the lottery. "Thank you so much. We love you, Chloe. We will see you tomorrow." I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. "I loved you too," I whispered to the empty hallway. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and walked back into my conference room to finish my workday. Tomorrow, I was going to help my parents plan an event. And it was going to be an event that none of them would ever forget. The sunlight poured through the massive vaulted glass ceilings of the grand atrium, casting long shadows across the imported marble floors. It was a breathtaking space designed for the absolute elite of Atlanta. It was also a space I knew intimately, having orchestrated million-dollar corporate galas within these very walls. Sitting at a small polished tasting table in the center of the empty ballroom, my parents looked incredibly small. Thomas pushed a thick ivory folder across the table toward me. His hands were visibly trembling. "Thank you for coming, Chloe," he murmured, keeping his eyes cast downward. "We know we do not deserve your help, but we just want to make things right. We invited the church elders and the community leaders. We are going to publicly apologize for the misunderstanding and show everyone that our family is united and healed." Evelyn nodded vigorously, dabbing the corners of her dry eyes with a tissue. "We cut them off, Chloe," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sorrow. "Jasmine and Preston are gone. We see clearly now. We just need you to look over these vendor contracts because the venue manager said a licensed coordinator has to sign off for the deposit to be waived. Please, baby, just help us clear our name." I did not reach out to comfort her. I simply pulled the ivory folder toward me and flipped it open. The first page was a layout schematic for the ballroom. I scanned the floor plan and my eyes immediately caught the table count. They had requested 20 round tables seating 10 people each. I kept my face perfectly blank, but my mind went on high alert. 200 people was not a small, intimate gathering. That was a full-scale production. I turned to the second page. It was a preliminary contract for the catering and bar service. Prime rib champagne fountains imported floral centerpieces. They were attempting to book the highest tier package the venue offered. But it was the third page that made my blood run absolutely cold. It was the ticketing and donation gateway agreement. My parents were not just inviting people to an apology dinner. They were charging a minimum donation of $500 per plate. And buried at the very bottom of the page in the fine print, under the billing and beneficiary section, I saw the routing information. The funds were not going to a community charity. They were not going to the church. They were being routed to an LLC registered under the name Apex Logistics Solutions. It was Preston's dummy corporation. I stared at the black ink on the white paper, feeling a profound sense of clarity wash over me. They had not kicked Jasmine and Preston out. They had not seen the light. This entire apology event was a massive fraudulent gala. They were using the guise of a family reconciliation to crowdsource $100,000 from our own community. They were going to use the church elders and our extended family to secretly pay off Preston's gambling debts before he was indicted for federal wire fraud. And they wanted me to sign the liability waiver because I could get the venue deposit completely wiped using my corporate credentials. They were trying to make me the legal guarantor of a federal financial scam against my own people. I looked up from the folder. Thomas and Evelyn were watching me with wide, innocent eyes. They truly believed I was stupid enough to fall for it. They thought my lifelong desperation for their validation would completely blind me to their grift. They thought the promise of a public apology would make me compliant. "This looks very organized," I said, forcing a warm, reassuring smile onto my face. "In fact, I think this is exactly what the family needs right now. You two look so tired from all this stress. You have been carrying such a heavy burden." Evelyn let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, pressing her hand to her chest. "Oh, Chloe," she gushed, leaning forward. "I knew you would come through for us. You have always been such a good daughter. God will bless you for this." "We were so worried about the vendors. Why do you not go home and rest?" I told them, sliding the folder into my briefcase. "I will take over from here. I will handle all the vendor contracts, the catering, and the guest list. Leave everything to me. You just focus on writing your speech for Saturday night." Thomas stood up looking like a man who had just been saved from the gallows. "Thank you, baby," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "We will see you on Saturday." I sat at the tasting table and watched them walk out of the ballroom arm in arm. They were probably congratulating themselves the entire walk to their car, thrilling in the fact that they had manipulated the family mule one more time. I waited until I saw their vehicle pull out of the VIP parking lot through the glass doors. The moment they were gone, the warm smile vanished from my face. I picked up my briefcase and walked straight to the grand staircase heading up to the executive offices. I knocked twice on the heavy mahogany door of the general manager's office. Sterling was a sharp, no-nonsense man who had worked with my firm for years. "Come in," he called out. When I walked in, he looked up from his computer and smiled. "Chloe," he said, standing up to shake my hand. "I was wondering when you would come upstairs. Your parents were quite insistent that you would be taking over their account." I took a seat across from his desk. "Sterling," I said, keeping my voice strictly professional, "I am taking over the account, but I need to invoke my firm's master contractor clause for this event." Sterling's eyebrows raised slightly. "That gives you complete legal and financial control over the booking," he noted. "Exactly," I replied. I need to change the payment gateway immediately. Reroute all incoming ticket sales and donations through the venue's secure escrow account rather than the third-party LLC they provided. Hold every single dollar. Do not release a dime to that LLC." Sterling typed a few commands into his keyboard. "Consider it done," he said. "Are we expecting a problem with this event, Chloe?" "I am expecting a revelation," I told him, standing back up. "I will see you on Saturday night, Sterling. Make sure the audiovisual team has the main projection screens fully operational." I walked out of the grand atrium feeling the cool air conditioning against my skin. The trap was perfectly set. I spent the next 48 hours executing every detail with flawless precision. I confirmed the guest list, ensuring that every single influential member of our community would be in attendance. I even made a discreet phone call to Julian, the venture capital analyst, to ensure that Preston's angry investors received anonymous VIP invitations to the gala. Saturday night arrived quickly. The Atlanta air was thick and humid, but inside the grand atrium, the atmosphere was nothing short of magical. I arrived early to coordinate with the staff, but I stayed completely out of sight, observing the arrival of the guests from the darkened VIP balcony overlooking the main floor. The ballroom was transformed into a vision of luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the white linen tables. 200 members of our community, church elders, local business owners, and extended family members poured through the doors, dressed in their finest evening wear. They were here to witness a family heal. They were here to support what they thought was a noble cause. Then I saw them. Standing near the grand entrance were Jasmine, Preston, Thomas, and Evelyn. They were dressed impeccably, playing the perfect united family. Jasmine was wearing a stunning emerald silk gown, smiling brightly as she hugged our aunts and uncles. Preston was standing right beside her, shaking hands and collecting thick envelopes of cash donations that people had brought to support his fake community fund. My parents were beaming, soaking in the respect and admiration of their peers, looking like absolute royalty. It was a flawless performance. They were standing at the very peak of their pride, counting the thousands of dollars flowing into their hands, completely unaware that the floor was about to drop out from underneath them. I stood in the shadows of the balcony, gripping the master microphone in my right hand, waiting for my cue. Down on the main floor, Preston stepped up to the front podium. He tapped a silver spoon against his crystal champagne glass. The sharp clinking sound cut through the low hum of conversation. The 200 guests began to quiet down, turning their attention toward the stage. Jasmine stood proudly by his side, beaming like a beauty queen. Thomas and Evelyn took their places right behind them, looking like the perfect supportive parents. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," Preston began, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. He gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward to project an image of confident leadership. "Family is the foundation of our community. And tonight, we are not just celebrating Thomas and Evelyn's beautiful marriage. We are launching a new initiative to support local entrepreneurs. Your generous donations tonight are going to build true generational wealth for our future." I looked at the audio technician stationed in the sound booth across the balcony. I gave him a single sharp nod. The technician flipped a switch. Preston's microphone went completely dead right in the middle of his next sentence. Preston tapped the top of the mic a few times, looking confused. "Hello," he said, leaning closer. "Can we get the sound back, please? I think we have a technical difficulty." I flipped the switch on my own master microphone. My voice echoed across the massive ballroom, crisp, clear, and dripping with absolute authority. "Good evening, everyone," I said. 200 heads snapped up toward the VIP balcony. Jasmine gasped and dropped the stack of envelopes she was holding. Evelyn covered her mouth with both hands. Preston's face instantly turned the color of chalk. "I am Chloe." I continued stepping out of the shadows and walking slowly down the curved grand staircase toward the main floor. Thomas and Evelyn's daughter, and the official event coordinator for tonight. I hope you are all enjoying the champagne because unfortunately this entire event is entirely fraudulent. A wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the crowd. I reached the bottom of the stairs and walked right past my freezing, terrified family. I stopped directly in the center of the ballroom floor, commanding the space. If you turn your attention to the main projection screens behind the stage, you will see exactly why we are all here, I announced. The two massive 20-foot screens dropped down from the ceiling with a heavy mechanical hum. The high-definition projectors clicked on, illuminating the dark room with glaring white light. On the left screen was a blown-up copy of the forged mortgage documents. I made sure my parents' signatures and my stolen Social Security number were highlighted in bright yellow. "This shows exactly how Thomas and Evelyn stole my financial identity to bail out Jasmine's credit card debt," I explained, projecting my voice over the rising gasps of the audience. On the right screen, I projected Preston's offshore bank statements. "And this clearly shows the embezzlement of federal investor capital to pay for $75,000 in illegal sports betting." I clicked a button on my remote and the center screen lit up. Right in the middle, I projected the secret catering contract for tonight. "And this document proves that every single dollar you donated at the door was funneling directly into Preston's personal bank account to keep him out of federal prison." Complete chaos broke out in the crowd. The silence was entirely shattered by pure outrage. I looked into the audience and saw Aunt Valerie, the same woman who had texted me just days ago, calling me a disgrace. She was staring at the screens with her hand covering her mouth in absolute horror. Deacon Hayes was standing up, shaking his head in sheer disgust, glaring at my father. The tech investors who had attended, the ones Julian had tipped off, started shouting aggressively at Preston. Harrison, the lead investor, pulled out his phone and immediately dialed the police. Preston desperately tried to back away from the podium, holding his hands up to plead with Harrison, but the wealthy investor simply spat at his feet. As the legal contractor for this venue, I am officially canceling this event due to criminal fraud, I declared, speaking over the deafening noise. Building security has already locked the perimeter doors to prevent anyone from fleeing before the authorities arrive. For those of you who donated electronically, I have already intercepted the payment gateway. I refunded every single dollar directly back into your bank accounts an hour ago. For the cash donations, please see the security desk in the lobby to reclaim your envelopes. I turned around to face my family. They were completely surrounded by angry guests and approaching security guards in dark suits. Jasmine was sobbing uncontrollably. Her golden child facade was completely shattered into a million pieces. Realizing she was going down with the ship, she suddenly turned on her husband. She started hitting Preston's chest, screaming that he ruined her life and lied to her. Preston ignored her, staring blankly at the floor in total defeat. Thomas and Evelyn were clutching each other, looking completely destroyed. They looked around at the faces of their friends, their pastors, and their community members, seeing nothing but absolute disgust and betrayal. Their pristine social image, the thing they valued more than their own daughter, was dead and buried. Evelyn looked at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "Chloe, please," she whispered over the shouting crowd, reaching a shaking hand out toward me. "How could you do this to us? We are your family." I stepped closer, looking right into my mother's terrified eyes. "You wanted me to host," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I hosted. Now get out of my building. Out of my—" The head of venue security stepped between us, grabbing Preston firmly by the arm. The flashing red and blue lights of police cruisers were already visible through the massive glass windows of the lobby, illuminating the marble floors. The officers marched through the front doors, pushing past the angry crowd to slap handcuffs directly onto Preston's wrists. Jasmine collapsed onto the floor, screaming as they read him his rights. I stood in the center of the ballroom, watching them drag my brother-in-law away, while the church elders turned their backs on my parents. The trap had closed beautifully. The truth was out for the entire world to see. And for the first time in my 35 years of life, my hands were finally clean. I stared at the name of the LLC printed in small black ink at the bottom of the venue contract. Apex Logistics Solutions. My heart pounded against my ribs, but my face remained an absolute mask of calm. My parents were sitting right across the table from me, holding their breath, waiting for my reaction. They thought they had perfectly disguised their massive financial grift as a simple apology dinner. They thought I was just grateful enough for their attention to sign my name and hand over my corporate discount. I slowly closed the heavy ivory folder. I did not throw it across the table. I did not stand up and scream at them for trying to make me an accomplice to federal wire fraud. Instead, I looked at my mother, Evelyn, and I gave her the warmest, most reassuring smile I could possibly muster. "You know what, Mom?" I said, my voice dripping with gentle understanding. "You are absolutely right. This family has been through so much stress, and we desperately need healing. A community gathering is exactly what we need to clear the air." Evelyn let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, pressing her manicured hand to her chest. "Oh, Chloe." She breathed, her eyes shining with fake tears. "I knew you would understand. I knew you would come through for us. We were so worried about the vendor logistics. You do not need to worry about a single thing anymore," I told them, leaning forward and covering my father's shaking hand with my own. "You two look completely exhausted. I want you to go home, get some rest, maybe go out and buy yourselves something nice to wear for the event. I am going to stay here and handle every single contract. I will manage the caterers, the decorators, and the guest list. Leave the entire production to me." Thomas stood up, looking like a man who had just dodged a bullet. "Thank you, baby," he said, his voice thick with relief. "God bless you, Chloe. We will see you this weekend." I sat at the tasting table and watched them walk out of the grand ballroom. They were walking arm in arm, their posture completely relaxed. They were undoubtedly congratulating themselves on successfully manipulating the reliable older sister one more time. They thought they had secured their venue, their caterer, and their getaway fund all in one easy conversation. I waited until I saw their car pull out of the VIP parking lot through the front glass doors. The moment they were out of sight, the warm smile vanished from my face, entirely replaced by cold, calculated precision. I picked up the ivory folder and my briefcase. I did not leave the building. Instead, I turned around and walked purposefully toward the restricted administrative wing of the grand atrium. The venue staff knew me well. I had orchestrated multiple high-level corporate galas in this exact building. I walked directly into the office of the general manager, Sterling. He was a sharp professional man who respected my work immensely. He looked up from his desk, surprised to see me. "Chloe," he said, standing up to greet me. "Your parents just left. They told my front desk that you were signing off on the community event to waive the deposit." "I am doing a lot more than waiving a deposit, Sterling," I said, sitting down in the leather chair across from his desk. "I am invoking my firm's master contractor clause. As of this exact second, I am taking complete legal and financial ownership of this event." Sterling's eyebrows raised slightly, but he sat back down and opened his administrative portal. The master contractor clause was a perk of my corporate rank, giving me absolute authority over any booking I attached my name to. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, sensing the serious shift in my tone. "I need you to open the payment gateway they set up for the ticket sales and donations I instructed." Sterling pulled up the digital file and turned his monitor slightly so I could see. My parents had already set up automated email invites with links to a donation page. The funds were slated to be deposited directly into Preston's Dummy, LLC. "Sever that connection immediately," I told him. "Delete the LLC routing numbers from the system. Reroute every single incoming ticket sale and digital donation into the venue's secure corporate escrow account. Lock it down so that not a single penny can be withdrawn without my physical signature." Sterling typed, rapidly executing the command. "Done," he confirmed. "The money is locked in our vault." "Next, I need to speak with your head of audiovisual production," I said, reaching into my briefcase. I pulled out a sleek silver flash drive. I had spent all night loading this drive with high-definition scans of the forged mortgage documents my parents signed, the bank statements proving Preston's embezzlement, and the secret catering contract I was currently holding. I walked down the hall to the AV control room. I sat down with the lead technician and handed him the drive. I gave him highly specific instructions. I told him exactly when to cut the microphone power on the main stage. I walked him through the precise sequence of slides I needed projected onto the massive 20-foot screens behind the podium. I made sure the contrast was adjusted so that every forged signature and stolen dollar amount would be crystal clear to every person sitting in the back row of the ballroom. Finally, I called the head of building security. I requested a private meeting in the loading dock away from the main staff. I handed him a printed list of the federal wire fraud statutes Preston was actively violating by hosting this fake charity event. "When the presentation begins on Saturday night, I want you to quietly lock the perimeter doors," I told the security director. "Do not let anyone leave the ballroom. We are expecting a significant disruption, and I do not want the primary suspects fleeing the premises before local law enforcement arrives." The security director nodded, folding the paper and sliding it into his pocket. "We will have plainclothes guards stationed at every exit, Miss Chloe. No one is getting out." I spent the next 3 hours finalizing the trap. I approved the floral arrangements. I selected the finest champagne for the toast. I wanted the illusion to be absolutely flawless, so that when the floor finally dropped out from underneath them, the fall would be devastating. When I finally walked out of the grand atrium later that afternoon, the Atlanta sun was beginning to set. I stood in the parking lot looking up at the beautiful glass facade of the building. For my entire life, I had allowed my family to dictate my worth. They had treated me like a workhorse, carrying the weight of their mistakes, while they showered Jasmine with praise. They thought my love for them was a weakness they could exploit forever. They had no idea that my professional expertise was a weapon they could never match. I was not just throwing a party. I was orchestrating a masterclass in accountability, and I had just locked the doors. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy blanket of humidity, but inside the main ballroom of the grand atrium, the climate was perfectly controlled and the atmosphere was electric. I stood in the darkened VIP balcony, overlooking the sweeping marble staircase and the massive event space below. I was wearing a sharp, tailored emerald green suit that made me feel like I was wearing armor. I stayed completely out of sight, watching the doors open to the public at exactly 7 o'clock. The turnout was massive. 200 members of our community poured through the gilded doors dressed in their absolute best. There were church elders in tailored suits, local business owners in evening gowns, and extended family members who had driven from out of state just to be part of the healing process my parents had falsely advertised. And standing right at the center of the grand entrance was my family. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. Thomas and Evelyn were positioned at the front of the receiving line. My mother was wearing a custom navy blue silk dress, her hair styled perfectly. She was hugging people as they walked in, dabbing the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief, acting like a woman who had just survived a terrible tragedy and emerged stronger. My father was shaking hands, patting men on the back, and projecting the booming authority he loved so much. Right next to them stood Jasmine and Preston. Jasmine looked like she was walking a red carpet. She was draped in expensive jewelry, smiling radiantly, and kissing the cheeks of our older relatives. But the most sickening part was the mahogany lockbox sitting on a draped table right beside Preston. As the guests arrived, they handed over thick white envelopes. These were the cash donations the community was giving to support the fake local entrepreneur fund my parents had invented. I watched Preston accept envelope after envelope, his eyes lighting up with greedy relief every time a heavy stack of bills was dropped into the box. He thought he was actively saving himself from federal prison. He thought the black community he constantly looked down upon was going to blindly pay off his underground sports betting debts. I scanned the crowd and spotted a few faces that did not belong to our church or our family. Standing near the back of the room near the bar were three white men in sharp business suits. One of them was Harrison, the lead venture capital investor for Preston's failing tech startup. Julian had made sure they received the anonymous VIP invitations I sent out. Harrison was holding a glass of bourbon, watching Preston collect the cash with a look of deep suspicion on his face. Dinner was served at 8 o'clock. A fleet of waiters brought out plates of prime rib and roasted asparagus. The room was filled with the sounds of clinking crystal and joyful laughter. My family sat at the head table on a raised platform, looking down at the crowd like royalty. They were absolutely drunk on their own perceived power and cleverness. At 8:45, the waiters poured the champagne for the toast. It was time. Preston stood up from the head table, adjusting his silk tie. He walked over to the lucite podium, positioned at the center of the stage. He picked up a silver spoon and tapped it gently against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, clear ringing sound cut through the chatter of the 200 guests. The room gradually fell silent as everyone turned their attention to the stage. "Thank you," Preston began, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. He gripped the edges of the podium, leaning forward with a practiced smile. "Thank you all for coming out tonight. Family is the true foundation of our community." When Thomas and Evelyn asked me to help them put this event together, I was incredibly honored. Tonight, we are not just celebrating their beautiful 40-year marriage and the healing of this family. We are launching a new initiative to support local minority entrepreneurs. Your generous donations tonight are going to build real generational wealth for our future. He paused, waiting for the applause. A polite clapping echoed through the room. My parents beamed with pride. In these difficult economic times, Preston continued his tone, shifting to sound humble and serious. "We have to stick together. We have to support our own. And the funds we raise tonight will go directly to ensuring that the next generation of business leaders has the capital they need to succeed." I looked across the balcony to the sound booth. The lead audio technician was watching me through the glass window, waiting for my signal. I gave him a single sharp nod. Preston's microphone went completely dead right in the middle of the word succeed. He tapped the top of the metal mesh a few times, looking confused. "Hello?" he said, leaning closer. "Can we get the sound back, please? I think we have a minor technical difficulty." He tapped it again. Nothing happened. Then the heavy mechanical hum of the ceiling motors kicked in. The guests looked up as three massive 20-foot projection screens slowly descended from the vaulted ceiling right behind the head table. I reached down and grabbed my wireless master microphone. I flipped the power switch on and stepped out from the shadows of the balcony, walking over to the glass railing so every single person in the room could see me. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice echoed across the massive ballroom, crisp, clear, and dripping with absolute authority. 200 heads snapped up toward the second floor. Jasmine gasped so loudly I could hear it without a microphone. She dropped her champagne glass, and it shattered against the stage floor. Evelyn covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes widening in sheer terror. Preston's face instantly turned the color of wet chalk. He froze, gripping the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. "I am Chloe," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "Thomas and Evelyn's eldest daughter, and the official event coordinator for tonight. I hope you all enjoyed the prime rib because, unfortunately, this entire event is a complete criminal fraud." A massive wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the crowd. I turned my attention to the projection screens and clicked the button on my remote. The high-definition projectors blasted glaring white light onto the screens, illuminating the dark room. On the far left screen, a massive image of the forged mortgage documents appeared. I had used a digital highlighter to mark the forged signatures and the stolen Social Security number. "What you are looking at on the left," I announced, projecting my voice over the rising gasps of the audience, "is a forensic analysis of a fraudulent mortgage refinance. This document proves exactly how Thomas and Evelyn stole my financial identity 5 years ago to secure a $300,000 loan to bail out Jasmine's credit card debt." Evelyn let out a loud wail, burying her face in her hands. Thomas stood up, knocking his chair backward, looking around the room frantically, as if looking for an escape route. I clicked the remote again. The screen on the far right lit up, displaying Preston's offshore bank statements. And on the right, I continued, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You will see federal bank statements belonging to Preston. These documents clearly show the active embezzlement of federal investor capital. He did not lose his startup funding in a bad market. He stole it to pay for $75,000 in illegal underground sports betting debts." Complete chaos broke out in the crowd. The polite silence was entirely shattered by pure outrage. Aunt Valerie, the woman who had texted me calling me a disgrace, was standing at her table staring at the screens with her jaw completely dropped. Deacon Hayes was shaking his head in sheer disgust, glaring at my father with absolute contempt. I clicked the remote one final time. The center screen lit up directly behind Preston's head. It was the secret catering contract for the venue. And right in the middle, I declared, my voice ringing with undeniable finality, is the secret routing contract for tonight. This document proves that every single dollar you donated at the door or sent online was not going to a community fund. It was funneling directly into a dummy LLC registered to Preston to keep him out of federal prison. You were invited here tonight to be robbed. The room exploded. The church elders stood up, shouting in anger. But the loudest voice came from the back of the room. Harrison, the lead tech investor, pushed his way through the crowd, pointing aggressively at Preston. "You son of a bitch!" Harrison roared. He pulled out his cell phone and immediately dialed the police. "Do not let him move," he yelled to the other men at his table. Preston desperately tried to back away from the podium, holding his hands up in a pathetic attempt to surrender, but there was nowhere for him to go. He was completely trapped on the stage. As the legal master contractor for this venue, I am officially canceling this event due to criminal fraud, I announced, speaking over the deafening noise. I have instructed building security to lock the perimeter doors to prevent anyone from fleeing before the authorities arrive. For those of you who donated electronically, I intercepted the payment gateway this afternoon. I have already refunded every single dollar directly back to your original payment methods. For the cash donations, the mahogany lockbox has already been secured by the venue staff and will be handed directly over to the police as evidence. I looked down at the stage. My family was completely surrounded by angry guests demanding answers. Jasmine was sobbing uncontrollably, her perfect golden child facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Realizing she was going down with the ship, she suddenly turned on her husband. She started hitting Preston's chest, screaming that he ruined her life and humiliated her. Preston ignored her, staring blankly at the floor in total absolute defeat. Thomas and Evelyn were clutching each other, looking completely destroyed. They looked out at the faces of their friends, their pastors, and their community members, seeing nothing but absolute disgust and betrayal. The pristine social image they had valued more than their own flesh and blood was dead and buried. They were ruined. Evelyn looked up at the balcony, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. She met my eyes and mouthed the word please. I stared back at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no sadness. Just the cool, clean air of a woman who had finally cut the anchor from her neck. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "You wanted me to host," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that echoed through the entire venue. "I hosted. Now get out of my building." The heavy wooden doors of the ballroom swung open, and a dozen uniformed police officers marched inside, led by the head of venue security. They moved straight past the angry crowd and walked directly up onto the stage. The red and blue lights from their squad cars flashed through the massive lobby windows, casting wild shadows across the walls. I stood in the balcony and watched as they pulled Preston's arms behind his back and clamped the cold steel handcuffs around his wrists. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the stunned silence of the ballroom. Preston did not fight back. The arrogant tech founder who had tried to physically intimidate me in my own dining room was completely gone. He let his head hang low as two police officers turned him around and marched him off the stage. Jasmine scrambled to her feet, the bottom of her expensive emerald silk gown catching and tearing on the heel of her shoe. She chased after the officers, her voice cracking as she screamed at her husband. "You lied to me!" she shrieked, hitting his shoulder as the police pulled him away. "You told me we were rich. You ruined my life, you stupid, pathetic loser." Preston did not even look at her. The police escorted him through the center aisle of the ballroom. As they passed the tables, our extended family and the church elders physically turned their backs to them. No one offered sympathy. No one offered to pray for them. The people they had tried to con looked at them with absolute stone-cold disgust. The venue security guards stepped up onto the stage, surrounding my parents. Thomas and Evelyn were still clinging to each other, trembling like leaves in a hurricane. "Sir, Mom," the lead guard said firmly, pointing toward the exit. "You need to leave the premises immediately." My father tried to straighten his jacket, trying to summon one last ounce of his signature pride. "Do not touch me," he muttered, his voice wavering. "We are leaving." They walked down the aisle, following Jasmine's hysterical sobs. I watched from the balcony as the heavy glass doors of the lobby swung shut behind them. I did not follow them out, but the exterior security cameras fed directly to my tablet gave me a clear view of the VIP parking lot. The humid Atlanta night air wrapped around them as they stood on the asphalt. The police had already placed Preston into the back of a squad car and sped off, leaving Jasmine standing alone in her torn dress, crying frantically into her hands. She had no money, no credit cards, and a husband facing federal prison. The golden child was finally completely, entirely broke. Thomas and Evelyn stood a few feet away from her, staring blankly at the line of luxury cars pulling out of the parking lot. The church elders drove past them. Aunt Valerie drove past them. Deacon Hayes drove past them. Not a single person rolled down their window. Not a single person offered them a ride or a word of comfort. The community they had prized above their own daughter's well-being had completely and permanently shunned them. They were left standing under the harsh yellow glow of the streetlights, clutching nothing but their ruined reputation. 6 months passed. The silence that followed that night was the most beautiful sound I had ever experienced. The Federal Banking Commission moved swiftly. My parents' house was officially foreclosed on within 60 days. With no savings and their credit utterly destroyed by the fraud investigation, they were forced to pack up 40 years of belongings and move into a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. Jasmine filed for divorce the very next week, but it did not save her. Preston was indicted on multiple counts of federal wire fraud and embezzlement. His assets were entirely frozen, which meant Jasmine's accounts were frozen too. She was forced to sell her designer bags and her luxury vehicle just to afford a cheap divorce lawyer. Last I heard, she was working the reception desk at a local gym, complaining to anyone who would listen about how the world had treated her unfairly. As for me, the executive board at my firm called me into a private meeting the Monday after the gala. Richard, my boss, had reviewed the way I handled the crisis and protected the venue from a massive federal scam. They did not fire me for the public spectacle. They promoted me. I was officially named the Vice President of Regional Hospitality. Which brings me back to my pristine self-funded townhome on a crisp Sunday evening. The house smelled amazing, exactly the way it did 6 months ago, with the scent of smothered chicken and collard greens drifting from the kitchen. I set the heavy oak dining table, adjusting the linen napkins and the crystal water glasses. But this time, the people sitting around my table were not parasites. To my right sat Julian, the financial analyst who had warned me about Preston's collapse. Across from him was Angela, my mentor from the City Cultural Affairs office, laughing warmly as she poured a glass of red wine. Next to her was my best friend Keisha, a brilliant corporate attorney who had helped me navigate the credit freeze. There were no demands for money. There were no fake tears or gaslighting. There was only genuine laughter, mutual respect, and deep unconditional love. We toasted to my recent promotion, our glasses clinking together with a joyful, clear sound. I sat back in my chair and looked around the room. I thought back to the night my family had stood in this exact spot screaming at me. They had called me bitter. They had called me selfish. But the word that echoed in my mind the most was heartless. "You are completely heartless," they had shouted when I refused to break my own back to keep them warm. I took a sip of my wine and smiled. They were wrong. I had a heart, and it was incredibly full. I simply learned that protecting my heart from people who only viewed me as an ATM was the most loving thing I could have ever done for myself. I had burned their toxic world to the ground, and from those ashes, I had built a beautiful, peaceful life that was entirely my own. The most powerful lesson from Chloe's journey is that biological ties do not excuse financial abuse or emotional manipulation. True family is built on mutual respect, not parasitic expectations. Often the people who call you heartless for setting boundaries are simply mourning the loss of their control over you. It takes immense courage to stop playing the role of the dependable mule for a family that only values your resources, not your humanity. True liberation comes when you stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you, and instead choose to fiercely protect your own peace, dignity, and future. If you have ever had to cut ties with toxic